Okay, I think we can get started. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm welcoming you as the Executive Director of the European Audiovisual Observatory, also in the name of all my colleagues. And this is a great pleasure to have you here to this year's Observatory Cannes conference. I'm really pleased that you all got your ticket to ride and that you made it to our new venue. I think you will agree with me that this place here is a very appropriate place for our conference, a great new home. And we moved here on the invitation of our partner, the Marché du Film. Thank you to them as well. And the main motivation was to gain more space, so that even more of you can join. Unfortunately, I've seen there's still queues outside, but maybe we can hardly find an even bigger room than that one. Now, we have not only changed our venue, we have also changed our format for the conference. The first visible and actually also touchable change is the handout that you should have gotten by entering here. If not, make sure that you get one when you exit. But you will not only find information on this handout, we also have a publication. That is the export for European films. You can buy that one either here at the exit or at our stand in the Palais. And of course, we have lots of information for you here in this conference. Now, I would like to underline that the export analysis of outside Europe for films is possible only because we have a very fruitful collaboration with Comscore and with the national film agencies. We are grateful for that because this collaboration allows us to update and even expand our Lumière database, which is the tool to make all these analyses. Now, our exchanges with these partners have also inspired a little bit the style, the novelty of this conference, by that we want this to be an industry debate. And we as Observatory want to feed it with snapshot presentations, so to lay a little bit the groundwork, the introduction to each of the rounds of discussions. That also means that actually the success of this event will very heavily lie on the shoulders of the panel and on your shoulders. It will be as good as you make it. And we hope to get a lot of insight for all of us, but also for the observatory, so that we can continue to build your experiences, your expectations, your wisdom, if you so want, into our work and become, in return, more useful even with our publications and our events that we organize and publish for you. Now, we have this morning, I'm sorry, I'm obviously still asleep. We have not only the deal with you as an industry to enter into an exchange, we also have a deal with our moderator of today's session, Michael Gubbins. And should some of you not know him yet, that's the time. He is the chair of the Film Agency for Wales and partner at Sampo Media. But he's also a very experienced analyst, consultant, and journalist. And his particular expertise is film and digital media. So Mike will walk you through the panel. But before I let him do so, I have a couple of housekeeping points, 7 to be precise, but I'll make it short. The first one is, please tweet our conference. You see, the hashtag is OBSCAN216. The second is, you have interpretation. If you have the headsets, channel 1 is French, channel 2 is for English. Number 3, you will, if Mike so permits, be able to participate a bit from the floor. Number 4, now don't get scared, the conference is being filmed. And this is mainly so that the people who weren't so lucky to make it here on time and get a seat be able to still see the conference then later on YouTube, where we will publish it. We have number 5, that is that the USB key that you should also have received contains a lot of useful information from the observatory, a lot of our publications, so take the time, look at it. Don't only just delete and use the nice USB key for other purposes. Number 6, and that is maybe the most important one, unfortunately, we are limited in time. We have to end this conference at 11:30 sharp, and we really have to chase you out so that this room is free by 11:50. That does not mean that we do not like to talk to you or to chat with you, but we have to do it outside this beautiful cinema. So you can always find us at our stand, but maybe you also have time outside, really in the literal sense, after the event. 7th, we will be back next year. And now with this, Mike, if you please wanna hold our hands and take us on a magic mystery tour through the world of European film export.
Okay, thank you. Round of applause then. Right, okay, well you've heard the clock's ticking. We're going to solve the problems of European export in an hour and 3/4, which is going to be fine. Let me tell you what you're going to be doing, so no one's falling asleep here. What you're going to be doing is, what we're going to try and do here is make a list. We're going to try and answer an odd idea. We're going to try and answer the question of what makes films travel. If you can imagine that you had problems with film export and you were thinking of consulting, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can come up with some crazy ideas and then try and row back from them. I'm not suggesting that's happened. Or you can actually sit down and say, what are the factors? What are the factors that make film work? What are the films that actually, what are the factors that actually means that our European film can actually be seen across borders? Now, across borders is very difficult for me as an English person right now, or as a Brit. All the Brits in this room will know that crossing borders is a pretty depressing thought right now. Will probably be the last time. This may be the last time we're here as Europeans. In fact, we'll probably be stuck in passport control, waiting for our visas to be agreed. So we won't be able to do morning meetings anymore. So it probably will be the evening by the time we get anything done. But good job President Trump's going to be in power, otherwise we'd be worried. So what we're going to do here, yeah, there'll be the wall will be going up along, let's not go any further in here. What we're going to try and do then is, it's less walking you through than running you through. You are going to, as we try and get these facts in, what I'm looking for is hands up from time to time. So if you feel that there are elements that we need to discuss more, that we're wrong on, or that we're missing, that's for you to do this. So it's kind of instant consultation, and I think it's going to work really, really well, but I'm rather concerned. But luckily, I have a brilliant panel with me. We have Daniela Elsner, president of Doc and Film International. She stands Europa International as well. We've been on a lot of panels together. She's one of the most astute, I think, observers of this world. Really gets to the point. Looking forward to hearing from her. Stefano Mackenzie from Lucky Red. I was just saying, at Screen International when I was there, Lucky Red, as such a huge distributor, we used to, you had a little F1 button where you could just click that and it would come in for any film. So hugely important distributor, I think, in this world. But again, we're working across the value chain in other ways as well. We have Andrew Lowe from Element Pictures. Again, we're talking about a company that works in distribution, production, and actually right across to exhibition as well, which I think could be an important part of the discussion. And my friend Ted Hope here, now of Amazon, and hugely in demand, I suspect, wandering around the Croisette. But Ted, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure most of you do, was one of the kind of leading producers in what will probably be seen as one of the golden eras of indie film. And then went on, I think, to a very productive and very constructive period of championing changes in the kind of digital world, and particularly I think championing film talent in a changing environment. I think what you'll hear today is not just the Amazon thing. I think some of his experience there will be very valuable to our discussion. But each one of these sessions is going to, we're going to do it in 3 sections. Let me just explain the 3 sections first. Section 1, we're going to talk about what it is about the economics and the content of film that actually might make it travel. So we're going to try and look in broad perspectives from the supply side. Second part of this, we're going to look at the demand side. We missed the audience out far too much in the discussion, but equally I think that we had a very narrow definition of the audience in lots of ways in some of the discussions about export thus far, as if there was only one kind of demand from consumers, and that was for instant access to everything. So we're going to talk, I think, about the nature of demand in the second part. So supply, demand, and then we'll move on to policy, and we'll try and make sense of the policies that are out there in terms of film, but also I think suggest that from our discussion we could hopefully find some potential areas where policy might be looking more constructively and usefully. So does everyone get that? Yeah. Yes, that's good. Well, let's hear some shouting. And if you have those points, stick your hands up. Now, at the beginning of each one of these sessions, so we're beginning with the value of exports, we're going to have the European Audiovisual Observatory coming up and giving us the big picture. So to kick us off, we have Martin Kanzler, who's somewhere. Oh, there we go. A coup de théâtre, I think they call this. He's going to give us some figures that are going to help us have some context for our discussion.
Good morning, everyone. Over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to give you some figures on how well European films perform outside of their domestic markets. And the idea clearly is that you have some factual background for the discussion, the more qualitative discussion to be held by our panel. I'll look at 2 things. First is the actual market volume for export, and the second one will be for which producing countries is export particularly important. But let's start with the market volume. In 2014, we could register almost 3,200 European films that were on release in a cinema outside of their domestic market. About 1,000 of these films can be considered new films, meaning produced in 2014 or 2013. So that's a quite large number, and as you can see, it has been continuously increasing over the past 5 years. Overall, we estimate that every year about 1,500 films get produced in Europe and released. And out of those, almost every second film has at least one non-national release. In this context, I should mention that as a methodological choice, we are counting only, in the case of co-productions, only the majority co-producing country as a domestic market, and minority co-producing countries would be counted as export, actually, as a non-national admissions. The main reason for that is to avoid double counting of films. In terms of admissions, we can see that European films sold generally between 140 and 160 million tickets outside their domestic markets worldwide. Worldwide, that covers the markets that we have data for, which is roughly 45 markets worldwide, including 11 of the major territories outside Europe. Plus, for 2014, we had for the first time data for China, which accumulated for 15 million, but only for 26 films. So we don't know what the volume in China was. You might add another 15 million to what you're seeing here. That means, when you look at the importance of export, is that over 40% of the cumulative total admissions to European films are actually generated outside their domestic market. So, on a cumulative level, it seems that export is actually quite significant for the European film industry. Almost every second film gets exported in this very wide and export-friendly definition. And about 40% of the admissions are being generated on these markets. However, That does not paint the full picture. For one, you might have noticed that the number of film exports has been increasing while the admissions actually have remained more or less stable. That means it's a rather a fragmentation than a growing market. And the average, as illustrated, for instance, by the average admissions per new film, which in 2013 and 2014 have actually been lower than in the 3 years before. But actually more important than that, I think it's the concentration of these export admissions. In fact, out of the 2,800 films that we see on release outside of their domestic markets every year, on average, the top 100 films basically account for almost 90% of those admissions. So it's really highly concentrated. Another way to look at this is how many films fall into admission brackets. And we've seen that only 26 European films produced per year actually manage to sell more than 1 million tickets outside of Europe. Another 93 sell between 100,000 and 1 million. And the majority of export films in our data has only a maximum of between 1 and 100,000 admissions. So I guess the first main takeaway is that export on a cumulative level is significant, but it's actually only significant for a comparatively small number of films. Looking at for which countries, for which film producing countries is export important, there are two ways to look at it. In terms of absolute admissions, not surprisingly, the UK and France stand out. UK and French films regularly sell more than 50 million tickets outside of their domestic markets. That really by far is the largest number. Then followed by Germany and Spain, and then smaller countries like Belgium, Sweden, Denmark, and Italy, which sell 3, respectively 10 million cumulatively. Also very interesting is to look at the relative weight of non-national admissions of the total admissions generated by films originating from one country. And in that context, you can see that exports actually account for almost 80% for Belgian and UK films. So for these two film industries, export clearly is very important. Then there is a couple of other countries, including Austria, but also ones like Spain or France, where export is actually more than above the average, above 40%. And on the other hand, you have, quite interestingly, some countries like Poland, Turkey, or Russia, where basically only the national market really counts for those films. And that, the second point here is that when you look at this, you see that talking about European films as a whole actually is an oversimplification that does not really work, but we have no other way to organize a conference like this. But there are actually big differences when you talk about the individual European countries, what export means for the respective film industries. Before handing back to Mike, I would like to remind ourselves that these are data only for the theatrical sector. We have unfortunately no data at all on the physical video market, on television, and not to speak of VOD. So we do not know how important is theatrical and how does it interact with the other windows in terms of exploiting films in general and in terms of exporting films in particular. That's perhaps a topic that Mike and the panel can take up, and with this I'll hand over back to Mike.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think some really interesting things in there. Actually, one of the things talking about the British, and I've had a couple of people coming to me saying how much they're looking forward to exit, some of my French colleagues. But actually, if you took away the British numbers here, we're very instructed to know what the effect that would be on EU market share going forward. But it kind of illustrates a point, and that point is that when we talk about European film, we're not talking, we get this down to the idea that we're talking about individual films and all films are the same. This place called Europe's a much more complicated thing, and when we're talking about big films from big countries travelling, that's the answers and solutions are very different from those from small countries. I want to explore a lot of those issues, but I thought we'd start with you, Stefano, and kind of move along the panel with something really important, which is the question why we're talking about this, in the sense that we have the same, all of us on this panel, I suspect, have been in this debate one way or another over the years about European export. But is there something that's changing? Just in terms of the current environment, is there something which is changing? Are there things that are unchanging? And I want to talk about opportunities and threats here. So, is the environment fixed? What are the nature of the changes, and what does that mean in terms of opportunities?
Hello? Yeah, okay. It's a big question. A lot of questions in one. So, but I'll try to concentrate. So, yes, everything is always changing. The films are changing, the audience are changing, the exploitation is changing. So I think we should concentrate on things that need to be there. First of all, many times we look at, and today the debate is Netflix, Amazon television. We're talking of partners, we're not talking of enemies, because we all live in the same world. Starting through the producers, going through sales agents, the distributors, the television, the various services. And most importantly is, as Martin was stating, we are discussing of theatrical. Then there's all the rest. And not surprisingly, when I see what goes on television and how European films, I do have an answer to the question that Martin was asking, what happens on television? On television, very likely it will be something like the top 100 are the ones that are most brand, most bought, they do more business. Because everything starts, as if we speak of theatrical, of films that go to the cinema, everything starts in the cinema. So the big role of everybody, the major companies, smaller companies, each one of us has a role. The smaller companies like, or medium companies like ourselves, to create or to promote or to take to the market directors that tomorrow will probably or very likely go to the major studios and make the big films that win the Academy Awards. If we're lucky enough, we will keep them. Otherwise, they will go and create talent continuously and new films for the audience. But what I wanted to, which is very important, and which many times, even in terms of policy, needs to be understood, is the fact that we need to create our audience. So each one of us has a role. As distributors, we have a role of creating an audience by bringing to the audience new talent, new ideas, new kind of content, because the audience is becoming more and more demanding. The policy, I think, has the role of educating the audience, because how do you create an audience? There's three ways. There's the market, there's the distributors with their role of education, and that I think that policy should take care about. Because the kids today, how are they educated? YouTube, the market, and who's the strongest market? The strongest market is the top 100.
Right. Let's just quick, because I think you made a couple of really important points here. That last thing, I think about the potential polarization of the audience, which comes out of we're going to come to in the second bit, which is how much demand, the nature of demand itself, and how much it drives those top 100. How much it is the Donald Trump factor, actually, because you've heard of them, you end up voting for the ones that you've heard of. So how you create that demand seems essential. But let me just, when you say what's changed, I think two things come out here straight away from you. One is, in a sense, nothing is. In a sense, something hasn't changed, which is you're saying that the mechanism that's been going on for forever of a producer produces the films, a sales agent who understands the market buys it, hands it on to a distributor. That to you is something which still works, and I think that's a really important point to make
for film. Then there's TV series. There's the need of branded material that comes from everyone.
Right.
Netflix, Amazon, Lucky Red, Daniela, We Talk and Co. Each one of us is branding and to find an audience.
Yeah, but just to be clear, you're saying that's still the most efficient way. So if we're looking at what makes films travel, what you're saying is, well, companies that understand the market is what makes films travel.
Yeah, a film doesn't exist if there's no...
Right.
I mean, it does exist, but if you produce a film and you put it on a service,
Yeah.
whatever it is,
Okay.
it will last the moment that is there, but you don't create demand from the audience. It's very different.
No, okay. So the companies there and the theatrical market, you're still saying, and we'll come to the others on this as well. You're still saying that theatrical is still at the core of film, and whatever we do, that's because I think for a lot of this is a discussion we're going to be having for a lot of people, particularly in an overcrowded market. Maybe we'll come on to Daniela on this point, if I may. In an overcrowded market. Where everyone's talking about overproduction and so on, it's becoming more and more difficult to get into that theatrical market, and the economics of theatrical is getting worse. But you're saying it's still the essential way. If you don't have theatrical,
I'm not saying there's space for everybody. The shelf is a shelf, and so you're in, you're out, you're on for a short time, but it is the way you create
right?
the knowledge and the existence of a film.
Okay, just to be absolutely clear, what you've said there is when, in your view, what's changed in the sense is the opportunities to do that. There are ways we'll come to in creating demand, but actually, what we really need to do is work within the system that exists, where you've got a lot of experienced people who know what they're doing. That's your core idea, and a theatrical market still is the primary way of creating demand.
It's different ways of using your spare time.
Okay.
Now there's more demand and more use of audiovisual everywhere. The kids on the mobiles, but ourselves at home and everything. But it's going out. It's an experience which is completely different. That's why the cinema has to be like this.
Cool.
You know, a nice place compared to you and your wife in front of television or in front of your mobile or on a plane or whatever.
You don't know my
different
wife.
experience.
Daniela.
I don't think that it's brand new that there are only a few top films that really get the top figures. I think we were facing this since ever. The thing that changes nowadays that I think, definitely, I agree with Stefano that the traditional way is of course what we're all dreaming of, but now we also have various new ways, and I think the tricky thing nowadays is that we have to combine on a film per film basis what is the best career, how do we exploit it, and that's where actually our role of all of us is getting more and more complicated, because we have constantly we have to ask ourselves what is the best way, how can I bring this film to the most the broadest public, and how can I bring another film in a different way. And I think it's a very good example right now in France. We have a very small documentary, political one, that just crossed over 400,000 admissions, and it's going on and on and on, because it's the right topic at the right moment. And in theaters, people go just to the theaters, share the experience, talk about it, and this is, for me, that's cinema about. We have a film that just gets in the topic at the right moment, at the right place, and then you get the admissions for that. We had, I think it's a good example too, the documentary that won the Golden Bear in Berlin, which is Fuoco a Mare, which is a documentary on Lampedusa and refugees. If I started out telling people about this documentary before, and they stared at me like buyers and said, "What? Refugees, Lampedusa, come on, it's TV every night." And we sold this film into 50 countries, and it will get theatrical releases and then all the rest. But this is a very specific film, and we got a very specific attention. So I think really we have to ask ourselves all the time, what is the best way, and where are the best, how can we bring it out there the way it deserves? And for me, that's a tricky question, and I unfortunately don't have the right answer.
But to an extent, you could give that answer at any time, at any point in history. It's because that is what you do. You look at a film and you say, I see the potential in it for this, this, and this. What I'm trying to get to is beyond the idea that actually get yourself a good sales agent, get yourself a good distributor. Is this, if you just took the thing you just did then, is there something specific in the nature of films reaching niche audiences, for example. And that word niche is a very important one here, because when we're talking about crossing borders, a lot of the niches we're part of these days aren't just within our own countries. So has something changed that allows you to reach those niches in different ways outside of your country? Is it something where you ride the internet, as with the Lampedusa thing? You know, that's something where the topic has been pushed through social media and elsewhere.
Yeah, but the Lampedusa is a very traditionally sold film. So I think what changed really is that we can, on niche films, but not only on niche films, now we can think of different ways where, of course, we don't like the word festival films, but festivals can also be very useful if they are combined with VOD platforms, if they are combined with TV, etc. We can find other ways, and we have to find other ways, because, I mean, Stefan, you will agree, you will not bring the amount of European films we produce, it's impossible, you can't bring them to Italy, and it's not your role to bring them to Italy through a traditional release. We need you to bring the ones that you consider, we all consider, and at the extended end of the market considers that they have to be brought in a national wide release. But for me, there are also a lot of chances to do it differently, and I quite like this idea of we have alternatives, we just have to find them the right way.
Yeah, I want to bring Andrew in here. I just want to just get this point though. It's a really important one. One of the reasons why there's a relatively limited number, this is an argument that I think is an interesting one, that there are a relatively limited number of films that travel, is that there's a relatively small number of sales agents and there's a relatively small number of gatekeepers that make the decisions about what travels or not. And there is an argument that gets put a lot that we're in a very conservative time right now, that actually if you're already an existing established brand, you can travel and you're interested in them. But if you're looking at European film and the development of European film, we might be in a stage where it's becoming more and more difficult for new talent and new ideas to break in. And part of that problem is actually perpetuated by the fact that we have this same group of people making the same decisions. I mean, do you understand the argument?
And you were mentioning before, there's too many films, but I don't think there's too many films produced. It's just the fact of how of what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with pasta, with a car, or with I don't know, with a mobile. We're dealing with films. We're dealing with art. We're dealing with things that cannot be good. Let's say it. You know, most of the films that are produced are either local and they will not travel because they're an Italian comedy, French comedy, a German comedy, and we've all seen them. They cannot travel, and the other, they're not good. So you skim all those, and you have what's otherwise. You know, there would be tomorrow a distributor coming up the market buying a film that is just on the shelf and making a lot of money because it's really good. It doesn't happen every day. There is something that is left there, but what doesn't travel normally is just because, not because the decision makers or there's a lot of sales agents. There's quite a large number of distributors in every single country. There's not enough space on the shelves, and that's true because the theaters are what they are, and the audience is what it is, and the interest is what it is. But at the same time, there's a lot of production which is linked to what cinema is.
Right. Okay. You've opened up some discussion here about the nature of content. I think there are issues here about whether we have inbuilt conservatism in the system that we've got. So when we look at films that travel, I was watching a film yesterday. There are dangers. It had lots of English language in it, and we'll come to that as part of the content discussion. Had lots of English language, and I was looking at it. I thought, I know this has been made for export. It's almost it's got all the elements that make me think this is what's going to attract a sales agent. But in the great scheme about the future of film and what might travel, say if the answer to that question is whatever the smart sales agents and distributors think is going to travel, then we've got a conservatism that's fixed. Because it's the small number of gatekeepers are there, and I think there is an argument, but we'll come to that argument because it may be wrong. Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mike, I mean, I think what you say is true in one sense, that you see the same names popping up on all these films, but I think we work, and we're lucky to work in a very dynamic industry. So just taking just our recent example as a company, we produced Room and partnered with A24 in the US, and A24 were a key partner in helping us achieve the success the film achieved. We developed that film with the Irish Film Board and with Film 4. Film 4 are a partner who we work with very closely on a lot of our films. And but A24 are a new company, and they're, relatively speaking, in the US market a new company. They also picked up The Lobster, which we had here in Cannes last year, and they released last night actually in the US, and it's opened very strongly to great reviews. And we also announced a film at the market here, the next Yorgos Lanthimos, The Killing of a Sacred Deer, which A24 are going to release as well. So from a European production company's perspective, Lenny Abrahamson and Yorgos Lanthimos, two European directors who we're working with, all those three films I've mentioned, well, the two films that have been made have been exported globally. But a key factor in the success was finding partners, some of whom we have long-standing relationships with, like Film Board and Film 4, others new, like A24 and Film Nation in the case of Room, who helped us strategize and get the film out there and maximize its impact in the marketplace.
Okay, two things that come out of that. One is intellectual property. The existing intellectual property, it seems to me, is more important than it's ever been before. And in fact, I know the figures are absolutely clear. If you base your film on a book or an existing IP that people already know, if it's something that people are already aware of, like Room. Room was a successful novel before it was a film. You can bring in factors which will have international recognition. That seems to me a growing trend, that if you want your films to travel, it's good to have something you know that people are reading or watching, or it's a remake or so on. Is that? It's
sure. I mean, I think that's true, but that's not original either. That's been around for a long time. I don't think anyone could argue The Lobster was, IP that anyone would have recognised before it premiered here in Cannes last year. I think what both those projects have in common is talent, actually, and that's really the most important thing. We've unique filmmakers in the case of Lenny Abrahamson and Yorgos Lanthimos who have something interesting to say, and so yes, the book was important in the case of Room, but anyone who was close to that process knows the single person most responsible for the success of that film is Lenny Abrahamson. So I think that's the key thing, and in terms of a wider policy debate about where do we go in Europe and things that we can actually affect and impact, I think the development of talent is really a key challenge, and I think it's something we do quite well, and if there's an opportunity later we might get to talk about that in a little more detail.
No, I think we will. I'd say with Lobster, the thing with Lobster that is interesting and is an established talent is, again, I think the language was an enormous part of this as well, and 5 of the films in competition last year were English language films made by non-English language speakers. And I think there is an argument here, which is what we're getting to. What we're really saying here is, look, the system's not broken. It seems to be the argument that actually great film still works, and actually building on existing IP may be growing, but then that's because more people are reading, there's a more of a global culture where people know these books in other languages. The argument is about cultural diversity. The argument is when you go abroad, you end up making films that are more and more similar. That's the argument, that you end up only being able to export if it's based on existing IP, and only able to, and being hugely advantaged if you make it in the English language as opposed to...
Well, I accept the second point. I would challenge the first. I mean, I don't think The Lobster is quite a unique film. It's not a sort of generic international film that can travel well. I mean, that's a film that's sold globally and has performed very strongly from the UK to South Korea to France, right around the world. And yet it's a very distinctive film, and a challenging film in lots of ways, but it's found an audience in each territory that it's opened in.
Just quick, what made that? There's a great case study then. I mean, it was an international co-production as well. The Canadians were involved. What?
Not The Lobster.
Oh, sorry, not. No. What was I was in Room. I was talking about actually. I don't know why I'm still on The Lobster. Okay, I've got Lobster in my head. But Room or Lobster, you've got in both cases you've got kind of international co-production, international collaboration. What is it? I'm trying to find factors that might have made that succeed in a way that other films might not.
Well, I mean, I think in the case of both films, I mean, maybe take each one separately. The Lobster is a classic European co-production. So it was an Irish, UK, French, Dutch, Greek co-production, 5-way co-production with support from Euromage. It was sold by Protagonist in the UK. Coffee Loisir was our French bank. It was a great European collaboration. Yorgos obviously is Greek, and a lot of his regular collaborators worked on the film, so the writer was Greek, DOP, editor, all Greek. So, but the important thing was we started figuring out how Yorgos got to make the film he wanted to make. And the co-production bits only fitted in once we had that figured out. So obviously Greek dimension made sense because he's Greek. Our French partners were Oe Cour, and they came on board as just both distributors and financial only co-producers, so that didn't really compromise them creatively too much. And the UK, Yorgos is based in the UK with some UK crew, so CC Dempsey came on board as a UK partner. And then the Dutch bit was we had to do our post somewhere, and it made sense financially to do it in Holland. So that was the only bit that's a kind of classic European co-production thing. But the important thing was we supported Yorgos and made sure he got to make the film he wanted to make. And sometimes in co-productions, directors can be pulled all over the place and compromised all over the place. It doesn't work. So and we've done some of those in the past as well. So we had that experience. I think in the case of Room, the crucial thing for Room was we had the support of Film 4 and the Irish Film Board to develop that project, frankly in isolation, without having to get lots of people involved and lots of people weighing in with notes. And it's a very kind of challenging material. The book is a successful book, but a tough book. And Lenny and Emma worked very closely together, and only at the point that the script was ready to go out into the world did we then bring in other partners. And that again was all about protecting Lenny and what the sort of film he wanted to make. And so I think that's really the secret for the success about those films.
Right, so I'm going to move to Ted here, but just to be clear, the argument here from all of you so far is the system kind of works. The reason the diversity comes because you're looking for diversity. Talent comes because you want original talent, because that's what you think is going to make it in the market. The argument we're going to have about this is about the changing environment is essentially you're saying nothing's really changed. There's bits that we can reform and we can work on that are a bit better. But I do wonder whether Ted, you are the bit that's changed, aren't you? You are the
well. Before really going into that, to kind of, if I was to sum up what was said here, and just from again my personal experience. Really clearly with Room and Lobster, their success came from a clear thing. You had never seen a movie like that before, right? You could say that's understood really quickly. They also had great launches, right? When Lobster premiered here last year, not only was it one of the more star-studded films, but the materials, the poster, was incredibly distinct and re-emphasized that you would see a movie unlike anything else. The Room had a great launch at Telluride, which clarified for audiences and buyers that this was an award-worthy film that in all likelihood would have long legs. Each of those films had distinct elements that made them conversational, that you would be talking about these films for a long time. Each of these films had call them like discovery nodes, data points, different things that you could use to address core audiences to bring them in. And I think they spoke to the two big things that have changed, over the time. Because I think that some things are, we thought things changed more than they did. I totally agree with Stefano that theatrical determines the value of something for an audience. It's where the audience starts to build, and that's a key thing. And I think if you went back here 8 years ago, that was the question. But Amazon completely believes in the theatrical. It's what our whole program is based on. All of our films are theatrical, and it's not going anywhere. It will. I believe that we are just starting to recognize its core piece, and it will grow stronger and stronger. But the two things that have truly changed, and I think it is, that's where the questions have to begin, and how do we design, all of our, work to reach customers and audiences on a global basis, is that we have to recognize that there is a tremendous abundance of content, right? Everything is available anywhere, anytime, on any device. New work is in competition with old work. New artists are in competition with old artists who died long ago. And how do you make something distinct? Because the other thing that's changed, thanks to these, teleporting devices we carry in our pockets, is that actually, you know, time is in greater scarcity than ever before. You know, so we also presumably start to value it more, and different things take on different necessity, in that convenience becomes a very big issue. How do I get to where I'm going quicker? How do I maximize my time? And when you start to compete, start to align abundance and scarcity of time together, I think it does change our viewing habits. It does change how we determine what we're going to do next. And you have to address that in your work. I do think that you start to see something occurring with the greatest filmmakers working today, that they recognize that they have to up their game, that it's not enough just to have a good story, well told, with recognizable faces. They have to do something that starts to become almost stunty. You know, Lobster has a different performance style than you will have heard before. You know, Room takes a very, for lack of a better term, icky, subject, and makes it incredibly human and relatable. You know, like, how do you make something an event? How do you create a sense of urgency with a core audience so that they're going to say, yes, in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to change my behavior patterns, break my routine, break my rituals, and get out of my house and into a theater? That's a really difficult question to answer, and there's many different things we can do about it, but it is, first and foremost, that if I watch a film here and I'm considering buying it, and I don't think it's going to create a level of urgency with a core customer, a group we can determine where they are and how they might behave, I'm not going to touch that movie, because it doesn't qualify in that first level of, like, I'm changing my behavior, I have to see it. Ultimately, the piece that never changes is what we're saying. We want to find movies, we want to find material that people are intensely passionate about. You want that, I think everyone in this room got involved in movies because we felt that movies could change our lives, they could change other people's lives, they could bring us closer together, they could start to erase those borders, they could help us relate to people that are very different than ourselves, and that's the core thing. How do we find that element? And the little piece, from my own career that was a super big learning experience for me, the first, I probably owe my career to a film that I had been told by all the experts had no commercial value because it was a gay Chinese film that felt like it was from the 1940s, other than being gay and Chinese, and that was Ang Lee's Wedding Banquet. And it had the benefit of having a premiere in Berlin. It got a little boost by winning that festival's Golden Bear. But the lesson I learned from that is not that I should make all my movies in Chinese, which was definitely a question that people asked, but that the specificity of character, the trueness to a culture and somebody's individual experience was incredibly universal. And I think that trying to dive deep all the time in specificity and talk directly to an audience and a customer is the key to things always traveling.
Okay, no, and of course that's true, and I completely understand that. The bit that doesn't change and is necessary when you're exporting is, and I think you've all said it, the universality of theme, the universality based in a single place, but actually dealing with universal themes, like Icky. Everyone should make an Icky film at some time during their lives because everyone loves it all over the world. I'm not even sure. I'm sure Icky. I'm sure they would like to put that on the poster. But the point is, has something changed? And I think the bit you're saying is theatrical is still important, but there is less space and there is less time. You've actually got to get people more quickly than you've ever done before. And does that to you explain why there's such a predominance that the 100 top films are at the top? Because actually, to get into people's consciousness. You've got a tiny, tiny amount of time these days. You know, when you talked about The Wedding Banquet, it reminded me of a conversation I was having about Diva, which was one of those great films in the 80s that travelled, great European film. But I was told by quite a few people, they kept it on for a year. You know, they'd keep it on for months and months and months. But now you've got to make your hit within a tiny, tiny space.
But I mean, yes, in the theatrical, but now we have a
And that's
whole
where you
series,
step in.
Yeah, a whole series of other platforms. You know, I think that, you know, if we were to say, like, I guess the third thing that has changed over the last 15 years is that creators, distributors, so on, did not have really the means of maintaining an ongoing relationship, direct relationship with their customers or audiences, you know, and that still remains the biggest challenge of how do we do that, because you want to influence behavior, you know, along the way. And the film industry has always been a business of one-offs, where we actually don't try to think through the long term of how to give better value to the customers, how to keep something as an ongoing relationship. And the thing that, you know, you come back to, and I think they teach you this in, I don't know, Business 101, right, is that audiences are built by the consistent supply of quality goods by a trusted source in a, you know, as frictionless an environment as possible, a comfortable setting. How do you do that? It's really hard. But to me, that is one of the great things that's so exciting about the era we're living in, whether it's Amazon or our competitors or someone else. The audience has been aggregated, that we can reach them, and that is a tool that, you know, as a platform, we can share with all of our partners in different ways. And it's something that you start to see, whether it's filmmakers, because I know that Element thinks of it, or distributors, or sales agents, that process of shifting from we have something new to sell, we have something new to sell, we have something new to sell, that one-off, to how do we maintain an ongoing relationship is a whole other way of thinking about the business. And the industry is doing that now in new ways. But it's a key piece. Supply quality goods on a consistent basis, you know, in a comfortable environment.
Right, we're going to come back to some of these in the next section, which we're going to move on to about demand. But Daniela, you wanted to make a point?
No, I just think it's a big challenge for sales agents and distributors in Europe especially, because we have to be, as you said, very quick, and we have to do it together. And that's where I think the importance of sales agents and the collaboration with distributors is getting more and more important at a very early stage, because we have to face our different territories, and it's important that we have these territories with their marketing specificities, but we have to work it in a very short time lapse, because everyone wants, as you said, everything now. So it's not easy in Europe, and I think we're doing our best to really collaborate in the way that we get the films out all through Europe in a very short period, knowing that each territory has to find the right time, right place, etc. So that's, for me, it's one of our big challenges also to change compared to the US, where of course you have one language and one single territory somehow. So for me, it's a challenge.
On that, I think we start to see how some of the infrastructure of our industry is completely antiquated and no longer works. And I would say first and foremost, where I personally see this, and I see it in terms of our business, is the idea of a completed film market that has a public face. I.e., here at a festival, bringing a completed film to a global media event to sell to different territories defeats virtually the whole process. You know, that it's really difficult to, as a buyer, to come in, have your film exposed, the discussion started with the customers, with the audience, that the materials already exist, and we know we have an urgency to get that film into the customers. It's a very difficult thing. The films that Amazon bought here last year were works in progress, were promos. One of them opened today to 100% Rotten Tomato fresh rating, that being Whit Stillman's Love and Friendship, and literally I think we bought it a year ago to the date. But we wouldn't have bought it, frankly, if it was launching here, because it would have been too hard to fit into a schedule and to properly prepare. And that's something that really has to start to change if film is going to travel globally, whether it's a US distributor or international distributors. You need the strength of a festival platform for its launch. It's not an accident that we have Amazon Studios has 5 films in the official selection here. All of those are films that we got involved with early, you know, and we did think that they were well positioned to launch here, absolutely, you know, but we need, frankly, the strength of Cannes to help these films travel and reach our customers.
Right, Ted, you're preempting the next thing about the nature of how we build demand, which I think is really, really important. This is the next section we're going to move on to very quickly. I just want to quickly sum up where we've got to on this first part. I think what we're hearing is, you know, my concern, I think the concern of lots of people about the diversity of the content that might be travelling may just simply be a problem of perception that actually there never has been a time when lots of films travelled to a hugely original and brand new song. They still required going through sales agents. They still required going through a system. I think what you're saying here is you all kind of believe that the system can work, that if you make enough of an event of theatrical, if you make enough of an event and you understand the original elements, you actually know how to build on the IP, the source materials, you know how to cast and all of those things, those skills are still there. That hasn't changed. There's no need to actually rip anything up there. That actually can work. What you're saying is that there are mechanisms now that have made it better, social media and so on, that we'll come to in terms of marketing. The festival side of it, you're saying, is still important. I think that the English language and the IP stuff, I think the English language still concerns me personally. I think there is a danger, if language is not part of cultural diversity when we go abroad, then what is it? And you know, you can look at films made in English language like Lucy, for example. I'm not sure what differentiates that as a European film, or does it even matter that it's not differentiated? So what we've got is an argument here that the processes basically work and there's no need to rip them up in order to increase the travelling. I think what Ted touched on just a moment ago was interesting, which is time is the critical factor in all of this. There's consumer time, but actually we need more time. Too many things go into the market that are half-baked. And I think the argument here, and that's probably even more an issue than too many films that aren't ready. And what you're arguing there, I think, is we can actually cut out some space here, and if we could get more quickly and more effectively to audiences, that might actually help that travelling much greater. But you need to start that audience building much earlier. So, anyone got anything to add to that first part? Yeah, we've got one here. We've got a couple of minutes here.
I really hope that we will also discuss the main problem, because I haven't seen on the first presentation of Observatory division between movies made mostly with public money and movies made mostly with private money. If we do this dissection, we will see that confirm one research from 2012 from a famous professor from the French Academy Sciences Po. As much as public money rise, it doesn't affect in the same trend the movie export. So I think that it is very important discussion, because some people think that public money throw up the wind. It means that not correctly earn it, and this make some difficulties to the market. It means that most of exported film are made with private money.
Right, okay, we're going to come back to that in terms of policy. It's a good point, but we're going to come to that into the policy discussion. Let's move on to the demand. We've already been touching on this. It's impossible to take the issue away from the issue of demand. And I think that's where we need to go. So we've got a presentation first from Martin again.
What kind of films are being watched? For which films is there demand? In terms of in terms of market territories, it's not surprising to learn that the large territories, that the largest number of tickets for European films outside of their domestic markets is actually sold on the large markets, both in Europe as well as outside Europe, with, by that definition, the US actually being the single largest market for European films outside of their national markets, followed by China in the case of 2014. But again, I'd like to remind that this was only 26 films, and then the other mainly larger European markets. In terms of market share for non-national European films, the word niche was mentioned. It clearly is. On average, non-national European films take a market share of 10%. There are exceptions in smaller European territories, or what you could call little brother countries, markets like Switzerland, Austria, Belgium, where Dutch, German or French films will be counted as exported films in our statistics. It also shows that in terms of, and some countries, some markets have an exceptionally low share for non-national, including, I think it's Turkey, the UK, France or Russia. These are markets where traditionally the local films and or US films are most sought after by the audiences. That's just to give you a quick view on the data. We try to approach the question of for which European films does demand already exist by looking at a few, at the top 100 exported films over the period 2010 to 2014, and to look at which characteristics do they share. In this context, I would like to point out that we are not looking necessarily at the most important characteristics. Andrew mentioned talent, the involvement along the production chain from early onwards has been mentioned. These are things we as the observatory can't measure. So what I'm going to show you, run through, is a couple of characteristics that we actually can measure within the limited amount of time with data that we have. The first one would be budget. If you take budget as a proxy for production volume, production value, you can see that the data clearly suggests, I mean these are sample data, but they refer to the top 100 films which account for the majority, so it's actually quite interesting insights you can get from the sample. And that shows that, for one, there clearly is a correlation between the production budget and the average admissions that these films can generate. And interestingly here it says, if you want to sell more than 4 million tickets, your film needs to be produced with a budget of above 10 million euros. At least that's what the data over the past 5 years would suggest on average. And that, by the way, is way beyond the budgets for which the vast majority of European films are actually being produced. The other issue was, or the other point was already raised. Basically, almost 90% of the admissions to European films outside Europe are generated by English language films. It looks a bit more diverse in Europe, but most of the share then goes to French films. In terms of country of origin, that is, so the language of course is closely linked to the country of origin, but not necessarily as much as you would expect it to be, with the UK films only accounting for 4 out of 10. It's actually then English language productions made in France, Germany or Spain, which account for the high share of English language films in the slide we've seen before. Genre, subjective manner, but I think the main takeaway is that in terms of export, it's drama films that works best, selling 4 out of 10 tickets for European films. And also, particularly outside Europe, action thriller. Has also been mentioned, comedies travel less, and that is particularly true for when you go outside Europe. Within Europe, there is a certain, I think it was 20% comedies accounted for. In terms of festivals, 70 out of the top 100 films had won at least one festival award, so that's also a feature shared by most of those films. Already touched upon, this is an insight from academic research based on Lumiere data. that suggests that actually what matters most to make films travel is that the audiences abroad are already familiar with some aspects of the film's cultural content. Can be the actual story, can be the way, the language of the film, can be talent, has already been mentioned. As I mentioned, some of these factors, the really important ones, we can't measure, so that doesn't mean they are not important. We've also looked at 3 characteristics in terms of production and of distribution. 60 out of the top 100 films were produced as co-productions. And basically all of them, at least outside Europe, were handled by an international sales agent. And another important point is the distribution power within the exploitation markets. We've looked at the percentage share of films by admission brackets that was distributed by a US major, at least in one territory. And you can see that for those films who made more than 4 million, 3 out of 4 of these films were distributed by a US major, and only 1 in 10 of those films which sold between 400 and 600,000. So this is a clear sign. I'm not reducing distribution power to US majors, but that was just a way of trying to measure the indicator. So to sum up, it seems that our demand already exists for big budget, award-winning UK English language, UK or French drama films which are based on already familiar content, which are produced as international co-productions, handled by a sales agent, and distributed by a US major. So, of course, these are features which are not shared by the vast majority of European films, and the question is there a way to create demand for other types of European films? And with this, I would like to hand back to the panel.
Okay, well, we've touched on a few of these things. Maybe we've touched on quite a few of these things, so we're already in this discussion, so it doesn't go on quite so long. But I think you're asking the key point here, which is are these fixed factors? Because I see a lot of these things and think, is it cause or effect? You know, do comedies actually not travel because we don't think comedies travel? Because we know this stuff. Is it based on knowledge, or is it based on a set of assumptions? I'm just interested to know whether you feel how far demand is fixed, or how far demand might be changing because of the nature of the internet, social media, cross-border conversation.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt, this is going back to your earlier question as well, there is an awful lot of change going on in the industry, and I think some of the things Ted was talking about are particularly relevant. From a distribution perspective, we've seen theatrical continues to be a good business to be in. DVD has imploded, absolutely imploded. In Ireland, we've seen the rapid sort of demise of all the traditional retailers, DVD retailers and renters. And from a distribution point of view, what we're not seeing is digital revenues replacing those former DVD revenues. So there is a gap. And I think part of the gap is changing behaviour by audiences, so they're doing other things. And part of it has to be piracy, although it's very hard to quantify the financial impact of piracy, but anecdotally there's lots of evidence to say it's piracy. But I think I think that's a very interesting presentation we saw from Martin, and I think one of the really challenging things, I don't quite know what the answer to it is if you take those statistics, the US market is driving a lot of exports for European film. The future for a lot of European films in the US market is on TED's platform or on its competitor's platform, and it's difficult to read subtitles of a Turkish film on a laptop, and that would suggest to me that it's going to be tougher in the future rather than easier to get that. I know there's the long tail theory, but I think the cinemas that used to support foreign language film, they're still there, but it's harder and it's more expensive. And certainly the market I'm more familiar with in the UK, it's extremely difficult to get foreign language films away anymore. I mean, it's just
but this is the point that answers Martin's question. I think is these aren't. It's economics that's driving this. You know, I go to events every now and again where they say, what should I do to make my film more viable for the international market. But the reality is the reason why so many things are being made in English, the reason why these particular trends that have been pointed out by Martin are true, is because the economics have got tighter and tighter and more difficult. So actually more conservative choices are being made. It has to be based more, at the moment, it seems to me it's based more on the things you know are going to work. It seems a little risk averse. So is that your... I mean, Amazon, let me just take Amazon before you do this. Amazon's front page, incredibly powerful, but the back catalogue going right the way through. I mean, one of the dreams, again, is that you'll have more and more choice, but actually it's very much driven by what you choose to put on the front. It's the stuff at the beginning that makes, again, and they tend to be things that tick all those boxes.
I think we see that good ideas can come from anywhere. It's definitely a principle of Amazon's, that risk-taking is a wise business choice to try to experiment and find new ways to bring value to the customer and the audience. All of that is always been a part of, frankly, my creative practice, my business practice, and thankfully exactly what Amazon is. And I think when you do recognize these big changes of abundance and scarcity of time and connectivity and that internet thing, that you want to try to utilize all of that. The question of comedy and traveling and is one a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's interesting. You do see pretty much the same statistics come up when you try to figure out what types of films win awards. It's very rare that you find somebody like a Woody Allen, who is a comedic voice and auteur that wins awards. And that's why his films are distributed, on a global basis, because they're scarce. There's how many comedic auteurs can we name? When I try to do it, it's usually 4 or 5, of all the films that are out there. If we had a practice to develop more of those voices, which would mean funding them so that they had a consistent supply of quality goods, that more comedy might very well travel, because certainly people enjoy it, as we got to see on opening night.
I think this is a major part of our policy things, which we're going to finish off with. And I completely understand what you're saying, but your choices may be smarter and better, but they are pretty much the same things. These patterns become self-sustaining, don't they? I mean, maybe I can come to Stefano on this. That these patterns get set after a period because the economics get tighter and the decisions you take are forced to be more. It's forced to follow the pattern that's been created here. Is that? Do you recognise more conservatism and more risk aversion?
I think there is conservatism in the idea that the films need to speak in English. One thing I hate is a foreign language film, especially in our world. Foreign is sort of bad word, foreign language. In Italy, because we dub, which some may think it's like a horror, there's no such thing. The concept doesn't exist. A French movie speaks in Italian, a Chinese movie speaks in Italian, a German movie speaks in Italian. And that's also the reason why, if you look at the numbers in the UK, for example, which is the Anglo-Saxon English-speaking market in Europe, and France, which has a different story, but Germany, for example, Spain and Italy, the big territories, the big dubbing territories, there is a sort of democracy of access to the market, because the cultural gap is more limited. And by the numbers we have seen, the countries that have worked a lot on export, of course, France is the obvious choice, because they have worked throughout the years as a system to promote their cinema, to promote their ideas. And today, when I buy a movie, many times I pay a French movie more than an American movie, because it has the idea, it has that marketing hook that allows me to speak to my audience that is, as we were discussing now on the numbers, knowledgeable, knows the faces, the rhythm of a foreign language film in French. So I think that the idea of speaking in English is not what will solve the problems of European
But
cinema.
we're not just talking about...
And there is an Italian director recently was talking to us and was saying, I made my film in English. If I could go back, I would shoot it in Italian because I lost my voice. You know? So
I want to come to that. Daniel, you say your piece, and I'll explain. The losing your voice is the whole point of this question.
Yeah, but actually there's statistic for French films that actually French films in French language do very well, and it's not because it's in English that it's doing much better. It's a production value added thing. Like Lucy is a different thing, and we're on a different scale. And I think what is also very important that we have to point out here, of course, it's really depending where you put the scale at. If you look at a US driven production, high value, is going through US major companies to be released. There's nowhere to compare of like 80% what we see in competition in Cannes now, because that's very specific. I mean, let's say the European competition Cannes films are very specific films, as we said, as Lobster, etc. And their added value, they get to the markets. And don't forget, like in Germany, the biggest art house hit 2 years ago is a French comedy. So I think there is space for European film with their specificities. And if we lose them, then it's actually getting tricky. Like that's what your Italian director said.
I think that's the nature of the discussion we're having here. Is we talk about European film travelling, but it's the notion of Europeanness. If films get more like American films, so what we end up doing is making more and more films to some kind of formula that we think makes them travel, you end up in a world, to me, where that may work economically, but you've lost that sense of Europeanness. And the French language, frankly, is not that far behind English as a sensible place to make your film either. I mean, if you look at most of your figures at the beginning there is a huge Francophone market with a big domestic market. There's a big German market. Your Austria and Switzerland stuff isn't because Austria and Switzerland are good, it's because Austria and Switzerland have got German speakers. So what you've got is these kind of linguistic groups that are very strong. What I think the question was, yeah, but how do you get new voices and smaller countries within Europe? How do we get those past a situation where they can reach the kind of new audiences that are being outlined up here? Or can you?
it's not easy, for sure. Speaking of Italy, as I'm Italian, there's a role that all the players play in the market to develop it one way or the other. Now Italian producers have started to understand that the foreign market is very important, and they're starting, to produce films that can travel more. For a long amount of time it was drama or comedy. There's not a lot of genres. Look at Spain. I'm always astonished by the quality of the Spanish directors, by the variety of genres, after France for sure. Spain is the place where, and many then travel to Hollywood. Of course, the smaller the territory is, the tougher it is, because there is the barrier of the language, there is the barrier of the culture. But at the same time, the cultural diversity is our strength, and is the reason why from Hollywood they're stealing our ideas, the remakes and all of that. There's a lack of ideas around the world, and so there is the need of cultural diversity. The big point here is the mainstream, so McDonald's against slow food. And a little bit, Europe has to become more mainstream by keeping their slow food characteristics, if you know what I mean. Because that's what we are.
I sometimes wonder whether we're kidding ourselves. This whole European thing that we make quality and Americans make crap is kind of a regular discussion. But it seems to me, no, I know what you're saying.
There's no such thing. We just mentioned Woody Allen or Ang Lee or there's no such thing.
I have a thing about Woody Allen.
It's interesting. I've always personally, struggled with this debate. Is it the question of, going directly to the audience and giving them exactly what they want, or is it the leadership that brings people forward to what they ultimately want, but may not yet know? Do we walk on the paths, or do we build the paths where people walk? Those questions. For me, in my experience in the film business, it's really been interesting to see how little true audience focus goes into the creative process of really trying to understand who you are speaking to and giving them a return on the investment of their engagement with a film. That process is huge. And it's been really exciting for me as a creative person to be part of something at Amazon that is so, frankly, customer focused. It is such a huge obsession at Amazon of thinking about the customer. And it's really refreshing, having spent all this time in the film business, to be surrounded with people who think that way. And that question to me is often how I start to evaluate films, in that, what are we leaving the audience with when it's over? Like, for a long period of time said, we just want to entertain them to kill time. No, we want to make that investment in that time more valuable. When the movie ends, what are they going to be talking about? That is the utility of cinema. If we leave them with something to talk about, to keep that conversation going, that film is going to travel from me to Michael to Andrew. We're going to talk about it, and that's how the audience is going to build. And I think that's like the prime thing. What is the takeaway? What are people going to be talking about when the movie ends? You have to be able to answer that question clearly.
And the big thing, I guess, that social media and there are now more tools for doing those things. I just wondered, because we need to move on to the next section, which I think is about what we do about these. We'll just take a point from here first.
Thank you. It's about content, and I have a question to Ted. You said that specificity is needed by audience and can give you worldwide impact. On the other hand, especially in 2016, where we are speaking about diversity and to promote the diversity and to know more and more the other, etc. How can you, as Amazon Studios, challenge the 2 points to combine between the two in terms of content? Thank you.
Well, I think that you see some of that just here, right? So we're a very young company, right? This is our first year. And we have 5 films in the official selection. One of them is our first foreign language film, Park Chan-wook's Handmaiden. When we got started, the first film Amazon released and made was Spike Lee's Chirac. Those definitely speak to different audiences than Woody Allen's, audience too. But what all those films have is a strong personal vision from the filmmaker. And they all, generally, you certainly see it. What was so exciting to get to make Chirac with Spike Lee, the urgency of that. It actually took us only 10 months from that first meeting with Spike to having the film in the theaters, right? When you think about one of the challenges of the film business that's always been here, it's kind of like future casting, like a crystal ball. Where will the audience be 3 years down the road, when we're ready to make this film? That was 10 months. And we got to make a movie about the state of America, essentially, the state of Chicago specifically, based on one of the oldest stories, right, I think from 300 AD, that has always been universal, a problem that we always have, right? And I think that ultimately comes to it, that if you do believe in those things, specificity, the customer's, wisdom at the same time, and the boldness of an author's vision, it starts to piece together. You don't even need I'm not driven by a diversity mission, but I think if you look at the films that we'll have out this year and out next year, the statistics in terms of whether it's gender, race, orientation, any point of view will be far more diverse than what anyone else has, because that's frankly what I think the customer today wants.
I'm going to come back to this. If you could just hold on to, we'll make the next. What we're going to do is try and work out some solutions here. I think that one of the things you're raising here is about data, how much you know audiences, and one of the arguments here is that audiences, does knowing more about audiences and interacting with audiences make you more conservative, or does it make you actually more adventurous? And we'll come to that, because I think data is an enormous part of the policy decisions that we need to have. Because if we want different films on, it seems to me the problems that you're all saying is those budgets will always be high, because actually, if you want to hit those points there, the reason why high budgets are there for exports is you've got to buy internationally recognised content, internationally recognised actors and talent, and you've got to have a load of very expensive ingredients in order to make something which is immediately recognised. What we're going to try and work out is whether there's anything you can do about that.
I was just going to add another little factor to that, which I hope gets recognized. We actually pay very well for our movies. It's been publicized that we paid very well for all of these films that are here. And hopefully that starts to change the nature of budgets. That there's always been the history in the film business, frankly, with a lot of people driving the cost down, driving the acquisition down, not giving a fair value for it. And I think if you know that there's a trusted buyer also in the market, hopefully it will encourage some risk, whether it's through national subsidies or private equity, to start to increase those production values.
Or it distorts the market. That's something we'll come to in a moment.
We shall see.
Let's talk about policy and solutions on this final bit. Maya, you're going to come and give us a presentation.
Yes, indeed. To make European films travel, that's one of the main goals of many public policy measures at European level. So what I will try to guide you through is to have a look, really just a very brief overview, because we are a bit short of time, so it will be more a memo than a deepening. I will then make a focus on two main measures in the online world, which is the availability and visibility, which I would like you to memorize as keywords of this panel. And then with a few graphs, I will try to show you how these have been working into practice. These are all very familiar concepts to you. Creative Europe as measures for support, and this will, I guess, also answer the question from the floor on public funding. Digital Single Market Strategy as a measure for ensuring cross-border access to content, and then Audiovisual Media Services Directive in order to involve media operators in this concept. When we mention Creative Europe, we talk about quite a lot of money. It's 100 million euros, so just for 2016. And there is a great variety of measures that range from also film literacy. We've been talking about educating audiences, also measuring the audiences, but also about co-productions and giving money into co-productions funds also for promoting the distribution of non-national films, which is very important. It's clear that this is just a complementary measure to the national ones, because we have, of course, national film funds, we have tax credit measures, we have fiscal incentives, which also form part of the policies that are being developed at national level. When it comes then to the digital single market strategy, we know that there is quite a bunch of actions. We are talking about 16 of them, and not all are relevant, clearly, for film traveling. There are some of them, though, that are significant. I would just like to mention the copyright reform, which will take place very soon. The regulation on content portability is being discussed just these days. We all know it's based on this legal fiction to ensure that citizens who travel across Europe can enjoy content as if they were sitting at home. And then we have actions that will soon come in order to ensure cross-border access to content, and this will also include measures of Creative Europe. When it comes to the obligations on the operators, I would just like to remind, I'm sure you're all familiar with the sets of obligations that are introduced by the Audiovisual Media Services Directive that involve both the traditional broadcasting, but I would like to highlight especially what is happening in the online context. Member states have received quite a wide amount of flexibility. They can choose among different sets of measures, and it's on these that I would like now to invite you on a journey across the member states. So we will go down from the pan-European level to a more national context in order to see how member states have been dealing with making films, first of all, available in their catalogs and making them visible, because it's clearly not enough just to have a large variety of films in a catalog if the users don't see them and don't find them and then cannot view them. Both Creative Europe and Audiovisual Media Services Directive play a role in this regard, but I would like to draw your attention to what is foreseen by the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. Member states can choose among two types of measures. They can choose to oblige the video-on-demand providers to contribute financially, directly in the production, or also in the acquisition of rights. But they can also opt for a different measure, that is to ensure that there is a certain share of works in their catalog. How this has been realized into practice, you will see from this map. It's a sort of harlequin, isn't it? You see many colors, and these reflect many different models. You will see here in green the member states who have opted for purely financial obligations. You will see then in pink the ones that have opted only for sharing catalogs. Then you have stricter states as France, Spain and Portugal who have opted for a combination. And then if we go towards the orange and the blue, we move towards a greater amount of flexibility. But all member states have opted for introducing these measures in order to ensure that films are made available in the catalog. But what happens when we try to see how visible they are? We are then talking about prominence obligations. The directive mentions in the recitals only one of these measures, which is to make these films presented in an attractive way in the EPGs, the electronic program guides. But it also leaves great room for flexibility where practicable and with appropriate means. How has this been turned into practice? Here again, you see nationally a big variety. Europe is divided in two. In light blue, you see member states who have just opted for making it optional. In dark blue, those who have, or believing this is a very important measure and have made it mandatory. And I would like now to focus on those who have opted for the mandatory obligation, because it's quite interesting to see what type of choices they have made. You see a variety of solutions. Some of them have opted for obliging catalogs to mention the origin of the films. That's indeed a very helpful tool in order to allow the viewers to see where the films come from. Not only, other member states have opted for search tools in order to allow the users to find what they actually are looking for. And then you have other countries who believe in advertising measures, which means publicity on the homepages, in the catalogs, in the so-called carousels or in magazines. And then you have also combinations of these measures. So again, we have a great variety which mirrors perfectly the flexibility that is allowed for by the directive. But what happens then in practice? If we try to translate this in numbers, what do we see? Do these tools work? Have a look at this graph. This concerns availability, so the presence of European works, films in particular, in 75 VOD catalogs across the 28 member states. You see, there is a clear dominance of US films, but the figures change according to how you count the films. This is very interesting from a methodological point of view. If you count the titles only once, you see that there is quite a balance. You have 41 US, 43 EU. But US doubles the European films once you count the different language versions. So, and this has also been mentioned, because then the films are, of course, present in more catalogs at the same time. What does that mean? If we count the single titles, we see the variety of films. So we stress the cultural diversity and the variety of films available. But if we look at the different language versions, then we look at the volume. And these figures, they remain substantially the same in the two business models that are the main ones in VOD, that is subscription VOD and transactional. And clearly, there is then the issue of the choice that has also been mentioned. When we talk about SVOD, the subscription-based, it's clear that the aggregator wants to please the consumers. So then algorithms plays a role. Consumers get what they want because they already watched certain films. But when we go to the transactional ones, then we are more or less in a shop. So then what decides what sells best? So these models are different in concept, but they translate in figures that are almost the same. What happens then on the side of the visibility? We have done 3 case studies on 3 major countries, on Germany, France, and UK. And here what I would like to stress is that quite surprisingly, there is not a dominance of national European films. There is a certain variety, and there is a presence of also non-national European films. Of course, in the countries with a strong production industry, as in France, you will see that there is a slight dominance of national films. But what is then quite disappointing when we talk from a European film perspective is that there is still a dominant presence of non-European films in the catalogs, also in terms of availability. It's clear that here also the payments made by the producers, the studios themselves for the promotion play a role, and this is also showing a quite concentrated market. We are talking about, as also Martin showed in his presentation, about a limited number of top films. Now, what will happen next? These are results of the current policy measures. A lot of things is being discussed, but especially from the point of view of territoriality. We have heard, certainly in the latest days, breaking news about what will happen with territoriality and audiovisual sector. This is being challenged both from the point of view of copyright measures and the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. I will not go into it here. I would just like to mention that there is an interesting report that you can read for free. And in addition to that, you can also listen to the discussion that I'm sure Mike will make very interesting now. And I wish you good continuation.
Thank you. We had someone patiently waiting to make a point. Did you...
Yeah, it was related to the previous session, really. I wondered if you could address the question of quality versus quantity. The first point made by the previous presenter mentioned budgets, and he said that I think films with about 4 million, achieving about 4 million admissions, had budgets of about in excess of 10 million. And there are a lot of European films being made for under those budgets. So it was really just to try and address that.
Well, I think we can pick up on a couple of those things. First of all, though, because we've got a few minutes really to address this. Looking at the problem, Stefano, looking at the problems we're talking about here, the directives, the kind of policies that you've seen up here, what is up there that you think is actually significantly important? What's dangerous and what is missing? Because it seems to me there's some missing links that we're not looking at the moment.
I'll be conservative because I'm the conservative, I feel. We are the conservative. So there's one thing that is missing, there is fight against piracy. Piracy is, I don't get it, I don't get it. If I go in any shop of Rue d'Antibes and just get in, get something, get out, there'll be the policeman take me, I'll be in jail. And this has been going on too long, and not much has been done while it can be done, of course. All the telcos have full responsibility, but they've been selling and selling and selling what? Download fast. And only a few years after there was the services coming in. So piracy has not been appointed. Education is the key. It's totally the key. Because the French movies have shown that they can travel because education has been built. By what? By the system, by the French, by the CNC, by Unifrance, by the distributors. We need education coming from the base because otherwise it will be the market to win and it will be the top 100. So education means giving the possibility to a kid to choose. Nobody wants to impose, because that would be the worst thing. anything, but it's just given the opportunity, and the opportunity comes only through education and culture. So those, I think, are the two keys. If I have to speak about territoriality and all of that, I mean, it's obvious. It's like an elephant in a crystal shop. How European cinema works, how independent, even American cinema works, is based on territoriality, is based on exclusivity, and I don't want to bore anybody because this has been going on far too long compared to the big, real problems. There's another little point which always strikes me is the availability. It's like if film was water, electricity, a commodity. Film is not a commodity. It's just not a commodity. So somebody always asks me, yes, but what about if I want to see Philomena? We distributed Philomena. Okay, Philomena is available here, 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 and here. It's available. Everything is available. It is. So I don't see the point about, yes, of course. Somebody will come up saying, yes, but what about the Austrian film produced in 2012 that has won Locarno? That's a point. Yes, I get it totally. No distributor in Estonia or in France or in Italy has bought it. There probably was no market. I don't think the solution is VOD, because VOD is an exploitation tool. Is not an audience creator tool.
Right.
I think, and maybe I'm not an expert on VOD.
Stefano, you've made a key point. I think, just to be clear, you see no correlation between the piracy fills gaps that actually the industry can't do. You've got no sympathy for that view that the stuff simply isn't available, so I'm going to pick it up from somewhere else. You've got no sympathy with that view.
So basically you're saying that if I can't find
well, if you decide not to distribute
downstairs at the cafe, which is the case, I will buy it by somebody that is pirating it and it's perfectly fine. You know,
I think the argument's more that if you decided you weren't interested in a film, does that mean I can't watch that film in my territory because you've decided that it's not something that you can make money out of? I think that's the argument.
But we're talking big numbers against very small numbers.
Daniel.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at Amazon, you have 5 films here out of 100 that get globally selected in Cannes, so there is already a huge selection. I mean, for me, what's really missing is, of course, we can bring the films out, but it doesn't mean necessarily the pirates issue comes out for films that everyone wants to see. There is not so much piracy issues, even if I look at my catalogue. Unfortunately, I don't even know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. If I take the Golden Bear, I took an anti-piracy company and I had to tell the director a few days ago that actually they didn't destroy many links because there's just no piracy of his films. And I was like, should I tell him or should I not tell him? So for me, I mean, I think what we didn't say enough maybe is that I truly believe that, of course, we need Ted, we need you, it's an overall game. But I think what we also have to be very specific about is that we have to create the demand, and that's what you say, education, but also how to bring these directors, new talents out. They just don't come out of scratch with the first film and they go all over the world. There are exceptions, of course, but then we have to build up these. I mean, even Haneke, even Dardenne, they all started with one film in Kerzen or even Semaine de la Critique, and then they came up one by traveling, by going out. And this is what we need to do this job, and this job is you, the sales agents, the producers. We have to do it all together, and then of course the VOD can step in, and that's for overall European business model. Of course it's good to have all films out, but who knows about all films?
No, and I think I think some really clear point that you've both made is that you create the demand that VOD actually picks up, that actually piracy. Well, that's not entirely true, but the argument is that piracy is, again, it's just an exploitation platform for the demand and the work that you've put in. So that's your argument. I think that the bit that's coming out to me of this discussion, which I think is very valuable, is there is a tier of films, Andrew, maybe you could speak to this, there's a tier of films that actually work. that you can look at and say this is the kind of stuff that people generally buy in the international market. But it seems to me that Daniela's pointing that there needs to be a big focus on the bridge between the often lower budget films and the new work, the exciting new talent that's coming through, and that can get them up to the point where they start becoming those international stars. Because it seems to me there's a ladder, and maybe that's an area where public funding ought to be putting a lot of energy.
I mean, I think, Mike, to be fair, it does. You know, like I think there are a lot of very interesting European filmmakers who've made 1, 2, 3 small budget, low budget films fully funded by their national film agencies, who then come onto the international stage and get picked up. I mean, the title of this session was "What Makes European Films Travel?" And I think the answer to that is quality. You know, if you make a good film, it will travel. And I think there's well-established routes to travel. So, you know, it might be a black and white film in Polish about a young girl who wants to join a convent. That travels because it's a quality film. So in some ways, I don't think that's, you know, it's not that there aren't routes out to the international market. That's not our biggest problem. I think our biggest challenge is ensuring that we are making quality films, and it's going back to the question Barbara was asking earlier. I mean, I think I think one change we have seen, I think in a positive way, there's now more quality than quantity. There used to be many more, my impression is, there used to be more films made because there was lots of silly money swishing around the system, and I think the money that's in the system now is more selective, you know, whether it's Ted or some of his competitors, or whether some of the private equity money, it's a lot more, it's cleverer money. And so I think that needs to be our emphasis. So if it's a kind of a policy question, what can Europe do to encourage its films to travel, we need to get behind and support local talent, allow them fail before they're successful, because that's often what happens, and make sure that the national film agencies and the pan-European media development funds have sufficient funds to allow that to happen. And I think I'm not going to, I absolutely echo everything was said around piracy. I'm not going to bore everyone around the territoriality question, but it is absolutely essential. I mean, as a producer, we're putting a film together in this market. We're selling France to a French distributor, Germany to a German distributor, and if we can't do that, we can't get the film made. And the notion that we'll be able to just go to Ted and he'll buy it for the world is ridiculous, because Ted has a capacity. You know, there's only a certain amount of things that Ted can buy. You know, and just going back to the part, I know, Ted, you don't endorse this, but the problem on the piracy thing is you can buy a little gizmo this size for 40 euros, stick it into your television, and every film that's on release in the US at the moment is there at a click of a button. I mean, the piracy question is a big issue, and it's not just for US content. I mean, we are seeing our films pirated, and I think the problem is, if you have a whole generation of people who are consuming content in that way, how do you think you're going to get them to pay for European content if they're watching every Hollywood film for free? So I think the complacency is extraordinary, and I think something has to be done about it.
No, I can see the argument you're making here is that quality is best protected by actually working with people who understand quality. The argument the other side, you're not in any way accepting any view. I think the argument that comes the other way, that actually consumer access, if you could reduce the barriers to consumer access, then you would find that there's a lot more demand out there than is actually currently being serviced. But I understand your point. The point that you're all making is, at the end of it, even if you reduced those barriers and took them down, your argument is no one would want the stuff that was on there, because quality requires investment from yourselves and from others and from public agencies.
I think we're missing a piece, though, in all of this, that time and time again we talk about movies as an individual thing, as a product, as a one-off experience. And I think really the question is how to improve the film experience, part of it. Amazon believes in theatrical because that's a core part of the experience. Amazon believes in local distributors like Lucky Red because they know their audiences, they know their customers really well. But to think also of just VOD as a delivery platform is also short-sighted. Every step in the chain, we want to improve the experience. How do you do that? Because that is how you start to shape people's behavior, right? Piracy to me still exists because it's simple, it's convenient, and it's a good price point, free, right? But the fact is you can do other things that improve the experience or improve the value. It was only a month ago that Amazon in the US separated or gave the customer the option of a video subscription only. It was part of a much bigger package of great goods and value that was hard as a customer to say, no, it didn't make sense. The platform itself, isn't just watching on your computer. It's an OTT option. You watch on your TV using the appropriate tools, and you have other added value. It had high density resolution, one of the best ways of image quality. The sound is great. The selection and convenience is incredible. And there's still so many other things. I've spent 10 years with Michael riffing on the different things that we can bring customers as creators. And that's what I think the answer to that solution of how do you limit, it's not just a question of the quality of the goods, it's a question of the quality of the overall experience. And some of it means collaborating with people who know their audiences best, know their platform best, but how do we work to improve every step of that chain? And that's more urgent than ever before.
I just want to leave you with the last word on this, because I think there's something, going back to some of your earlier kind of work, it seems to me there's two elements where public policy could be in here. We've kind of been quite dismissive about public policy, but I think that's probably to do with the fact that there's a sense that some of the stuff is common sense, and some of the stuff is actually potentially dangerous to the quality structure. But you've been involved in two things. First of all, at Amazon, it seems to me that data and knowledge is a huge part of actually the process, understanding what consumers want. That seems to me an area where public policy could actually play a part. And we have an organisation in the European Audiovisual Observatory, obviously, that has statistical interest. But it seems to me that simple day-to-day sharing of content and of knowledge between different producers, it seems to me is very important. The second thing that goes back to something you've talked about over the years is we don't talk about producers. The producers themselves and the relationship between producers and audiences, it seems to me that's an area where there ought to be considerably more interaction and interest. Because if you're building up over a long period of time, from the development stage through to the stage where it reaches these people, you've got a hell of a lot of potential points of interest that could get your film travelling. But we tend not to do that. Producers tend not to have that relationship with the audience. Do you still think that's important when we're looking at films traveling?
I was talking to a producer here who was asking about my career and what has worked. And the reality is, I think I had to make 50 films before anyone in the industry, and those are 50 films that traveled, that worked, that sold, before anyone in the industry started to recognize that, hey, that was Ted involved with those films, that there was a brand, there was a body of work. The industry didn't even look at it as a trusted source. And that piece of relationship, if a big part of producing is inspiring trust and confidence, how do we give that trust and confidence to whatever our audience or whatever our customer is? That sort of brand, trust is such a key piece. I'm a huge believer in producers. We reward them in our deals at Amazon. If Andrew would only bring us movies earlier, he would understand that fully. I've been trying to make that happen for a year, so hopefully that will come to pass. But yes, like those things, in little bits of ways, I've gotten my movies made because I've worked to develop a relationship with audiences of different sorts, whether that's through social media and trying to build a big following, or blogs, or writing books, or somehow helping for the quick understanding of trust and confidence. And I think that piece is really key, because it also creates repeated behavior, whether it's a customer or a consumer. I guess it's the same thing.
You're creating a brand. Okay, we're going to need to wind up. I've got 1 minute, then you've got to get the hell out of here as fast as you possibly can. Just briefly summing up, why do films travel? I think what we're hearing from this particular panel, and I think there's probably a lot of agreement out there from the nods going on, is that quality is still what counts. And quality and originality is incredibly important to films that travel. A crap film, as the argument, is not going to go there. But you don't do that by undermining territoriality, which is where demand is actually created. That's the point they're saying here. And I think what we're hearing right away from Amazon talking about theatrical is there's not a feeling that the whole thing is broken. There's a feeling that there are perhaps gaps, there's blocks in the arteries that actually could be unblocked. I think the argument we heard at the end is from a policy perspective, the bits that we're unblocking may not be the problem areas. In fact, you're trying to deal with the problem and creating new problems. I think the argument here is that really comes out to me, and maybe this is something for the Audiovisual Observatory to look at, is that top layer may be quite more natural than we think. Maybe there's always been a way that there will be a layer of films that travel really well. There'll be well-known auteurs, there'll be well-known stars, they will understand what the audience experience is, they'll understand the universality of what they're doing, they will attract big budgets as a result, and we'll get these kind of things here. I hope that we don't fall into the conservatism of only English language, but I think that comes out of the economics of film. Where there's a real problem, I think, at the moment with films that travel is how do we create that audience demand? That seems to me the critical area that you're all saying. And demand creation, there's a whole load of new tools. We've got new VOD channels coming online. We've got new opportunities. But that's got to begin at the beginning, I think, is what we're saying. You begin at the beginning of the process thinking about how do I work this new environment. And if we can do that, I think films may travel more. So, optimistic end, I hope. Thanks to the panel. And you've got to move. You've got to move.